The Winograd Commission was formed last year to investigate the poor performance of the Israeli political echelon and Israeli military in Israel's Second Lebanon War. To understand why that commission had to be formed, one has to go back to the summer of 2006. This was a war in which Israeli towns and cities were rocketed for the first time for more than a month. Indeed, until the very last day of the war, the third biggest city in Israel, Haifa, was struck with rockets of Hezbollah. Israeli soldiers, most of whom are actually reserve soldiers, came to their units and found they didn't have adequate equipment. There were requests of young soldiers from their parents to bring them canteens or to bring them other equipment that they would need for going to war. And because of that chaotic condition, ground troops that hadn't trained in many years, a commission was formed to investigate the results of the war and why the results were so poor. The commission, the Winograd Commission, which produced two reports, an interim report and now a final report, indeed reached the conclusion that Israel had not won the Second Lebanon War. But it didn't really assign any blame. It didn't really assign responsibilities, except in a very abstract sense, to the political echelon and to the military echelon, without calling for the resignation of Prime Minister Olmert. Already the defense minister, Amir Peretz, had resigned, and already the chief of staff of the Israeli army had resigned prior to the reports being issued. And this left many people in Israel very frustrated, because I think all Israelis want to know that the mistakes of the Second Lebanon War will be corrected. Now, on the military side, a correction is underway. Perhaps Israelis were complacent around the year 2000. The Cold War had ended. People thought that peace was about to break out. Israeli governments were anxious to cut their defense budgets, and therefore our ground forces weren't trained with the same tempo and intensity that they should have been trained. That's all changed. The Army of 2008 is not the Army of 2006, and ground forces are receiving equipment, they are training, and the kind of embarrassing scenes we saw in 2006 will not return. But the other question is the political echelon. Can the political echelon lead this country while the challenges are still continuing? Maybe right now not in Lebanon to the same extent, but at presently in the Gaza Strip, a massive military presence is growing of Hamas, very similar to Hezbollah, with full Iranian backing. Israel used to be able to block off, partially at least, the Philadelphia corridor separating Gaza from Egyptian Sinai. Now it's an open thoroughfare for equipment, for trained terrorists, for Palestinians who fly to Tehran and come back with training of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. So we are now sitting on a barrel of explosives in the Gaza Strip. And the question is, will this political echelon be able to handle that crisis better than the crisis that existed in Lebanon back in 2006? And there are no real clear answers to that. What the Winograd report states, even though it gave sort of very gray conclusions about the responsibility of the Olmert government, it clearly states that Israel needs a political and military leadership that can cope with the challenges of the Middle East. Because basically Israel's very future and very survival are dependent upon having that kind of quality leadership. Leadership that knows to ask the army the right questions, a leadership that knows to also conduct proper relations with our allies like the United States. One of the revelations in the recent memoirs of former U.S. Ambassador to the UN, John Bolton, was that the U.S. government changed a Security Council proposal without informing Israel, so that when Israel saw the nature of the ceasefire that was being proposed in the weekend before the actual ceasefire went into effect, Israel launched a hopeless 60-hour ground campaign to try and improve the UN Security Council resolution. Had there been coordination between the U.S. and Israel, then perhaps that ground campaign wouldn't have been necessary. But all of these mistakes, both on the military side, on the diplomatic side, are mistakes that Israel can correct, but the question is whether we need a new government. And I think that is why now, in the aftermath of the Winograd report, and in the aftermath of the sort of irresponsible statements made by Professor Yechezkel Dror of the Winograd Commission to the effect that Israelis have to decide whether they want peace with Olmert or former Prime Minister Netanyahu in office. I think now is the time for in which Israelis are calling very clearly for new elections, elections in which Israelis can choose who will be an alternative leadership to the leadership that clearly didn't succeed in the summer of 2006.